Welcome back to Definitely Not Definitive. I'm Ken.
And I'm Bethany.
And we're just a feisty couple in love that loves reacting to some Fallout.
Yeah, we do.
And so we're checking out Fallout Storyteller series, and this is Fallout Season 1, Episode 5, The Enclave.
But if you've noticed recently, Fallout has its own drink.
Yes, it does.
Stimpack Spritzer. But it's not complete unless...
Put the Stimpack in there.
Exactly. Otherwise, it's just a spritzer.
Yep, exactly. Cheers.
Cheers.
A revitalizing drink. Rejuvenating.
Indeed.
If you want all of our Fallout reactions, go ahead and check out the description of this video. We got a playlist there for you, as well as a link to our Patreon and get early ad-free access.
Yes.
Let's watch this.
Let's do it.
You've experienced the Fallout series in your own way, but want to learn more about its story. Well, to get to the heart of the story, you have to go back to the beginning.
What if we're gonna see Liberty Prime in action?
Oh, I hope so.
Against the Enclave. Whoever the hell they are.
They do such a good job with this, like making it look like an old home movie with like textured kind of almost what were they called? Like projector kind of.
As far as anyone knows,
video.
This wasteland is the best damned wasteland in the world. When America and China went head to head 200 years ago, both sides launched everything they had, and most people assume that China was blasted back to the Stone Age. The only way to know for sure is to jump in a boat and paddle across the ocean. So folks just assume that China, Europe, Canada, and the rest of the world got hit at least as bad as America did. People look out at this land and some of them just know in their hearts that it's the garden spot of the whole world. Maybe that's why we can't go more than a few decades without someone trying to take over the place. When humanity was just beginning the struggle to rebuild after the war, there was no sign of the government helping out. People formed tribes led by the strongest warriors and the smartest scavengers. The chain of command and the line of succession meant nothing to people who needed things done fast. The closest thing to a government that emerged was tribal elders, or the mayors of small villages. Eventually, in 2189, some of the larger towns in California banded together and formed the new California Republic, but they never claimed to be the government. With no communications from the pre-war government for over a century, the memory of it faded as new generations replaced the old, convinced the old president and his kind were long dead, but the wasteland ain't so lucky. 200 years ago, in the last days before the Great War, a secret coterie of America's top-ranking political and corporate leaders decided to duck and cover, big time. They scurried right off the continent, hid inside a secret offshore base, then cowered there while the rest of the country suffered a nuclear holocaust the government had caused. There they stayed, safe and hidden for decades. And the group we know today as the Enclave is the result of 10 generations of breeding between politicians, military brass, and corporate executives. The direct descendants of the people who caused the apocalypse? Not many people would make up a story like that, so it's probably safe to take them at their word about their ancestors. Regardless of who their great-grandparents were, the Enclave certainly has access to an abundance of pre-war tech and weapons. They hoarded it on a man-made island, a metal city that grew out of the ocean floor. It was once used to refine oil, back when people could pull oil right out of the bottom of the sea. The Poseidon oil rig was inaccessible to people on the mainland, so no one knew they were out there until they began their plan to rid the wasteland of everyone who didn't fit their definition of a real American. The Enclave had spent decades learning to improve upon pre-war weaponry. They weren't just collecting artifacts of the old world like the Brotherhood. They were looking toward the future. They had devices more advanced than anything seen in the wasteland, including the Brotherhood. It wasn't just better guns or the ginchiest armor. The Enclave had a fleet of flying vehicles they called vertibirds. Most folk had never even seen a car move unless it was hitched to a team of Brahmin, so these vertibirds gave the Enclave an edge over every other human group in the wasteland. They could send in drop teams to kidnap whole villages at a time to use as test subjects. They could suddenly appear at remote locations, then just as quickly disappear. Most importantly, they could travel to and from their offshore base secure in the knowledge that no one could follow. Well, almost no one. There was a person back then who seemed to have a knack for getting vehicles up and running again. People who lived in the den swear up and down that somewhere around 2242, they saw a person in a vault jumpsuit driving around in an old Christless Highwayman, the big green mutant taking up the entire back seat, and a cyborg dog poking his nose out the window. That's a sort of tall tale that would be easy to dismiss, but it happened in the same year someone managed to get a ship seaworthy again. They sailed that tanker right out into the ocean to the Enclave's base and took them down. Stories like that, they fill a body with hope. Maybe with enough work, we could all be driving around in pre-war cars, living the good life. In a way, that sort of hope for the future was what the Enclave wanted. And they got it at the cost of their own lives. Their ambition was their downfall. They weren't content to live out their lives in prosperity. They had to take back their country from the people they viewed as subhuman. To do so, the Enclave engaged in the sort of daredevil science that brought about the end, the Great War. They engineered a virus tailored for genocide, performed inhuman experiments, and even took to playing God by creating a species of intelligent deathclaws. Just like their ordinary brethren, they were giant beasts that could rip a man in half.
Damn.
Smart enough to think like you and me, and even mimic human speech. But even deathclaws were nothing when compared to the Enclave's deadliest creation, a man named Frank. It's hard to say just what Frank Horrigan was. People who saw him in person tended to die quickly and gruesomely. At some point, he must have been a man, a brutal killer, but still human. When the Enclave discovered the old Mariposa military base and the forced evolutionary virus bats within, Horrigan was exposed by accident. He was among the first of a new generation of super mutants created years after the Master's downfall. The arrogance of the Enclave's leaders led them to believe that they could improve upon the virus. The FEV and Horrigan were used for horrid experiments that would make the Master cringe. When they could learn no more from his suffering, the Enclave turned Frank into their most devastating soldier, a mutated cybernetic terror encased in their finest power armor. It's hard to imagine how anyone managed to defeat arguably the most dangerous being to ever walk the wasteland and bring down his Enclave masters. But somehow, the chosen one of an obscure northern tribe destroyed the Enclave oil rig, forcing the Enclave to flee New California. Leaderless and directionless, they soon rallied behind Autumn, a senior scientist who was contacted by a new Enclave president. It didn't take long for the remnants to reach the East Coast with their vertebrates. They had no fancy oil rig this time. They soon nestled into Raven Rock and Adams Air Force Base, pre-war bases that were nearly as impregnable. They changed their routine in Washington, D.C., promising that they could guide America back to the golden age of malt shops and drive-in movies. On the West Coast, they had a man who claimed to be the rightfully elected president of the United States.
Malts are never coming back.
By the time they reached the capital wasteland, things had changed a little. Now their president remained unseen and only addressed the public through a swarm of floating propaganda robots that spewed stars and stripes forever, along with political rhetoric so hollow that it sounded like it was written by a random word generator. The war for control of the capital wasteland was a trial for the Enclave. Bereft of their island fortress, without the unstoppable brutality of Frank Horrigan, they had to fight a hard war to gain territory. The Brotherhood of Steel had a strong presence in Washington, D.C., and super mutants roamed the streets looking for humans to abduct. The Enclave still had their technological superiority and their vertebrates. They even took control of pre-war satellites and could fire missiles that had been waiting in the sky for hundreds of years. But their greatest weapons were deceit and manipulation. The Brotherhood relied on a local wanderer for help in combating the Enclave. It is possible that the Enclave managed to convince this individual to implement a more subtle plan that could accomplish their goals even after their repeated defeats at the hands of the Brotherhood. Yet, it did not save them. In 2277, following their disastrous defeat by Liberty Prime at the Purifier, the Enclave was shattered again. With its leaders dead or missing, its major strongholds were soon annihilated by Brotherhood strikes. The few surviving members probably wished that they had stayed hidden on their private island out in the Pacific. Now the once mighty remnants of America's elite have been reduced to a handful of wistful old men hiding out in the wastelands. Most gave up on the Enclave's vision of the world and settled down to live quiet lives, getting as much peace as a person can in the wasteland. Travelers who visit a certain old motel in Novak can speak with a former Enclave pilot who isn't as bad as the legends make the Enclave sound. She's a tough old broad, but she's no Frank Horrigan. Out east, the Enclave continues to operate in small bands that harass the Brotherhood and anyone else who strays too closely to their remaining outposts. But they are devoid of leadership or any long-term plans. In the west, sharp-eyed travelers can sometimes spot the rusted hulks of crashed vertebrates. There's little else remaining of the Enclave, or at least that the Enclave wishes to reveal. Could an organization with such resources be entirely stamped out? Much like radroaches, the Enclave has shown remarkable resilience. The people of the wasteland should be prepared to deal with another hidden nest of these relics of the old days. For now, the Enclave has joined the ranks of those who fancied themselves the rightful rulers of the wasteland. Their glory has faded along with that of others like the Master. But it seems like some lessons are never learned. There's always someone new looking to claim our wasteland as their own. The new California Republic has flourished even as the Enclave faded, while the NCR has ruled their lands with relative peace and prosperity. Even this period of stability is threatened by a new would-be tyrant that seeks to rebuild yet another fallen empire.
Of course.
But that is a story for another day.
Okay, you know what? I feel cheated that we didn't get to see Frank versus Liberty Prime. That would have been fun. Would have been a fun battle. You know, I mean, I know it's not like up to them to decide that. That it didn't happen in the Fallout universe. But you know, I feel like in the Fallout universe, it would have been cool if we would have gotten that.
I'm fascinated by the Enclave, by the people who started it. So these scientists, these politicians who know that they've just damned the rest of the world to nuclear warfare and fallout, and they're hiding in a bunker. They are looking on themselves as kind of test subjects that have to breed to maintain humanity. I mean, there's a whole psychological study there on like what that must have done to them to be these people who did this thing, the guilt that you must feel knowing the rest of the world is wiped out and you survived. I mean, there's got to be some intense survivor's guilt, I would hope, you know, in a sense.
Well, plus it went on for generations. So I'm curious about the fact of like how they're able to maintain that, because I mean, I think even being like, you think at some point one of the like descendants would rebel or whatever, or feel like if they would feel some shame about, you know, what their ancestors had done, and figure like, you know, that they could maybe have done things a better way. And I'm surprised that they were taken down given like their superiority with you know, in the air with what they had for those like little helicopters. So so I was surprised that they were taken down and scattered. Yeah,
I would fully agree with all of that. And then I just love the cliffhanger it ended on. There's a new tyrant ready to come in, and all I could think was, there's always a new tyrant. Like, there's always somebody who wants to seize power. But the new California Republic, I feel like we've heard them alluded to so much at this point that I'm really excited to find out more about them.
And so when it talks about like, you know, the random person or whatever that came in and helped out things, I imagine that's like the player that they're talking about, you know, us as the players going in there and like the different missions that had happened and how it affected the world, since they're not like naming a specific person. And if I had that wrong, please let me know. But that's just kind of what I'm assuming at this point. The end shot for Frank when he was all built up was highly impressive, and I'm just, you know, he got cut down too soon in his prime.
He looked absolutely terrifying, but between him and Liberty Prime, my money would be on Liberty Prime.
Yeah, probably.
Maybe that's why we were saved seeing the actual battle, because it would not
been climactic.
Yeah, it might not have lived up to the hype that the two figures show on their own. Like, they're both very imposing figures separately, but together, I feel like Liberty Prime would kind of...
It definitely would have been hyped up too. The pay-per-view numbers on it would have been really good. The hubris and the arrogance of the Enclave, and thinking that, like, you know, they needed to purify. I mean, like, at least with the Brotherhood, they're just like, they are sticking kind of to their own little territory. At least the Western Brotherhood is, and they're expanding it a little bit. And like, they're you know, they don't really have mercy or anything like that, and they look down on anybody. But they weren't necessarily trying to, like, you know, rule the world again or rule the country again. And the Enclave, just to think that they could so easily do that, I think was their first big mistake.
I think it also is kind of a strong statement on the human character, that any of these people who get like a monochrome of power and decent living in this post-apocalyptic world, suddenly they're superior. Yeah. And like there's this, with that comes this desire to look down on everybody else, which is, it really is not a flattering picture of humans. No. That like we suddenly, when we get somewhere, now feel like we have the right to look down on others as opposed to kicking down the ladder and helping people up with us.
Well said. Well, then on that happy note, and if you want all of our Fallout reactions, check out the description of this video. We got a playlist there, as well as a link to our Patreon and get early ad-free access to our Fallout reactions and our other Definitely Not Definitive Games reactions, stuff on our Definitely Not Definitive channel, so lots of goodies over there. Thanks so much for checking out our reaction for Fallout Season 1, Episode 5 for the Storyteller season. This is the Enclave, but just keep in mind
that our reaction is definitely not definitive.